The rain didn't fall. It mourned. It came down in long, cold sheets that blurred the cemetery into a gray watercolor, washing the color out of everything except the fresh soil at Sarah Cooper's grave. Jack stood over it, with his shoulders curled forward, as if trying to shield the earth from the sky's grief. Scout pressed against his leg, the dog's fur soaked through tail, still and low. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath around them. Last one, the groundskeeper called from his truck. "Storm's picking up." Jack nodded, but didn't move. His fingers dug into the folded American flag in his hands, knuckles white. The flag still held the warmth of the chaplain who'd handed it to him an hour ago, saying words Jack barely heard. Words like service, courage, honor. Words that scratched at the empty places inside him. He stayed until the rain made tiny rivers in the loose dirt, until the taste of metal crept back onto his tongue, the same taste he knew from deserts far away where he'd watched men die and wondered why he didn't. Scout whined softly. "Yeah," Jack said under his breath. "I know, she's gone." He forced himself to step back from the grave boot, sinking into mud that grabbed and pulled like hands. His chest tightened. He felt the air thinning, as if the world were shrinking him down to the weight of a memory he couldn't carry. A pair of headlights rolled through the cemetery gate. The sleek black pickup didn't belong here. Not in this weather, not in this place, not at her funeral. Royce Bennett stepped out with an umbrella the size of a dinner table and a smile as thin as barbed wire. "There you are, Jack," Royce said, boots crunching on gravel. "Thought you might have slipped out before we had a chance to talk." Jack didn't answer. He didn't trust the words sitting on his tongue. Royce glanced at the grave, then at the flag in Jack's hands. As if both were props in a play he didn't care to watch. "Town clerk cleared the paperwork this morning," he said. "Everything Sarah owned is settled." Jack stiffened. Everything she owned. Royce nodded and pulled a small rusted key from his jacket. "It's all that's left," he said. "Some old cabin out in the hills, half falling apart. But hey, it's a roof." He held the key out like he was offering a cigarette butt. Jack didn't reach for it. Royce's smile widened. "Look, man, I'm trying to be civil. My aunt married you. Doesn't mean you're family. The house in town goes back to our bloodline. The cabin's what she had before she met you. That's yours now. Congrats." Rain pounded harder against the umbrella. Jack lifted his gaze, meeting Royce's eyes. "That's it. You're throwing me out today." Royce shrugged. "Storm's coming. Best get moving before the road washes out." When Jack finally took the key, his hand was shaking, not from fear, but something older, something raw. Royce leaned in close. "And hey, try not to burn this one down too." Jack froze. His jaw clenched. Scout growled low and deep. Royce stepped back quickly. "Touchy, touchy. Must be the PTSD they talk about." Jack said nothing. If he spoke, he wasn't sure he'd stop. Royce opened his truck door. "Good luck, soldier. You're gonna need it out there." The engine roared to life and kicked up mud as he pulled away, leaving Jack in the storm's growing roar. For a long minute, Jack just stood there. Rain beat against the flag. Lightning cracked somewhere over the ridge. Scout nudged his leg again. Jack finally exhaled. "Come on, boy. We don't have anything left here." He walked toward the old sedan he'd been keeping alive through willpower alone. Scout jumped into the passenger seat with a wet thud. Jack sat behind the wheel, the key to the unknown cabin cold in his palm. He looked back once more at the grave as the storm swallowed the cemetery. "Sorry," he whispered. "I can't stay." The road out of town twisted through the hills in long, lonely bends. Water ran across the asphalt in thin, snaking currents. Jack gripped the steering wheel harder than he meant to. The wipers thumped out a rhythm that reminded him of rotor blades, fast, relentless. He blinked hard. Not now. Not today. Scout pressed his wet head against Jack's shoulder, grounding him, pulling him back. "You're a good dog," Jack murmured. "Better than I deserve." He drove past the last streetlight on the edge of town, and the world went dark except for the thin beam of his headlights. The cabin wasn't on any map. Jack followed the rough directions Royce had tossed at him. Take the service road until the gravel runs out. Then look for the mailbox with bullet holes. At the turnoff, the car dipped into a pothole big enough to break an axle. Scout barked once in surprise. "Yeah, I know," Jack said. "Welcome home." Branches scraped along the sides of the car like fingernails. Dirt replaced pavement. Mud replaced dirt. Eventually, the tires spun in something thick and sucking. When the cabin finally appeared between the trees, it looked less like a home and more like something the forest had given up on. Half the roof sagged. The porch leaned forward like it wanted to collapse. The front window was covered by a warped board, a place forgotten by everyone except the storms. Jack killed the engine and stepped out into ankle-deep mud. The air was sharp with the smell of pine and rot. Scout hopped out beside him and shook violently, spraying water everywhere. Jack raised the key Royce had given him. "This better be worth it," he muttered. He jammed the key into the lock and twisted. The door groaned open with a sound like something dying. Inside the cabin was worse. Broken floorboards, a fallen beam, a smell like wet earth trapped beneath old wood. Rain leaked through a hole in the roof, dripping into a metal pot someone had left years ago. Scout sniffed the corner's tail tucked. "Yeah," Jack said softly. "I get the feeling too." He set the flag on a dusty table and looked around at the ruins that were now his life. Something tightened in his chest, not grief this time, but a strange, flickering determination. "I don't care if it kills me," he whispered. "This shack is mine now." Thunder boomed overhead. The whole cabin trembled with it. Jack glanced up at the roof, then at Scout, then at the pile of tools someone had abandoned long ago. A hammer, rusty nails, a busted saw. He rolled his shoulders. "We're not dying here. Not tonight." Scout barked once, sharp and sure. Jack grabbed the hammer. And somewhere behind the old boards of the cabin, in a place he couldn't see yet, something small and metallic glinted as if answering him. A secret waiting. A crack in the wood that would change everything. Jack muttered the words under his breath as he crouched by the cracked floorboard, trying to wedge the rusted hammer between two warped planks. The handle slipped in his calloused hand. His fingers were stiff from the cold, and the hammer wasn't much more than scrap metal, but it was all he had. Scout sat nearby, ears perked, watching every move with quiet patience. Outside, the storm had dulled to a steady drizzle, but the trees groaned in the wind like old bones shifting. Inside the cabin, the air was damp and stale, filled with the scent of mold, wet wood, and something older. Something buried deep. Jack finally pried the board loose. It came up with a splintering snap, revealing nothing but dirt, a mouse skeleton, and a nest of pine needles underneath. He stared at it for a moment, disappointed, then dropped the hammer to the side. "Well," he muttered, sitting back on his heels. "It was worth a shot." He leaned against the wall, feeling the ache creep back into his lower back. His body was still strong, but the war had left its stamp on every joint, every nerve ending. The silence pressed in thick. Too quiet. Too still. Just like some nights overseas when silence meant something was coming. Scout let out a soft huff and walked over, resting his head on Jack's knee. "Yeah," Jack said, scratching behind his ears. "I know, buddy. I'm tired too." The storm had delayed the inevitable, but the reality of this place was starting to settle in. The roof was barely holding, the floor was rotted in places, and Jack had no idea where his next meal was coming from. The backpack he'd brought with him held a bottle of water, 2 cans of beans, and a photo of Sarah tucked into the inner pocket. He hadn't looked at it yet. He glanced toward the corner where he'd dumped his duffel. Still zipped. Still untouched. His stomach growled low and angry. He ignored it. Instead, he turned his attention to the room again. The main area of the cabin was one large, open space. A few dusty shelves lined the wall. A rusted wood stove sat in the corner, its door hanging crooked. There was a small table with one leg shorter than the others and a broken chair beneath it. He got up and started moving slow and deliberate, checking everything. Old cabins had stories. They had bones. Sometimes they had secrets. The shelf near the window held empty jars, a cracked oil lamp, and a coffee can full of screws. But what caught his eye was the faded photograph tacked to the wood paneling. Just above it, curled at the corners, black and white, probably from the 30s or 40s. A man in overalls standing in front of the same cabin, though it had looked sturdier then. Beside him was a little boy and an old hound not so different from Scout. Jack stared at it longer than he expected to. There was something in the man's eyes, something familiar. Not hope, not exactly pride, just endurance. A thump startled him. Scout had nudged open a crooked cabinet door near the fireplace. Jack walked over, crouched, and reached inside. Dust flew up as he disturbed what was left of an old pile of newspapers. Beneath them he found a broken flashlight, a bundle of wires, and something wrapped in wax paper. He peeled it back slowly. Inside was a single box of matches. Dry. Untouched. Jack held them like treasure. He tested one. It lit with a clean, bright flare, and he quickly moved to the old wood stove. He gathered some broken chair legs, snapped them down, and stuffed them inside the stove's belly. Then he struck another match, held it to the splinters, and coaxed the flame to life. For the first time in days, warmth bloomed in the room. Scout laid down in front of the stove like he'd found heaven. Jack sat beside him, stretching his legs out. The heat softened his shoulders. The sound of the fire creaking through the iron was better than silence. He thought about Sarah, about the night they got the letter from the VA that said the treatments weren't covered anymore. She'd smiled and said they'd find a way. She always said that, even at the end. "You're still finding a way," Jack whispered, staring at the flame. "Just not the one we planned." The matchbox rested beside him. 5 left. Outside, the wind began to die. The rain tapered to a mist. The storm was passing, but it had left behind a strange stillness. A reset. Jack stood, walked to the door, and opened it slowly. The forest outside was soaked, dripping quiet. Not silent, just listening. He stepped onto the porch. The boards creaked under his weight, but they held. He leaned on the railing, or what was left of it. From this height, the hills rolled out in layers, fading into the fog. Pines crowded every inch of earth, their branches sagging with rain. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote cried. It felt like standing at the edge of the world. And maybe that's exactly where he was. Scout joined him, tail swishing lazily. Jack took a deep breath. "Okay," he said. "Let's start over." He didn't know what that meant yet. Didn't know where it would lead. But this cabin, this broken-down memory, was all he had now. He looked down at the steps where the wood was split and moss-covered. He looked at the wall where the photograph had been tacked at the crack Royce had kicked open, now barely visible in the gloom. And he looked at the dog sitting patiently beside him, eyes sharp and waiting. "You ever try to rebuild your life with nothing but a key and a dog?" he repeated. Scout tilted his head. "Me neither," Jack said. "But we're about to find out." He stepped back inside, closing the door against the night. As he moved through the cabin, he didn't notice the soft sound of wood shifting behind the wall where the crack had been. Didn't see the faint glint of metal deep in the grain. Not yet. But it was there, waiting, just beneath the surface. The next morning would bring something more than warmth, something hidden, something worth fighting for. And something would be watching, waiting for Jack to find it. Because war doesn't end when the bullets stop. Sometimes it begins with the sound of something buried finally trying to get out. Jack spat the words into the cold morning air like a dare. His breath fogged as he stood barefoot on the warped floorboards, shirt clinging to his back from sweat and dust. The sun had barely crested the trees, but he'd been up since before light hammering, tearing, patching. The kind of labor that numbed the mind, but made the heart beat like it still mattered. Scout paced the edge of the porch, ears flicking at every sound in the woods. The storm had passed overnight, but it had left behind swollen earth and the tang of wet bark and rust. A branch had fallen across the narrow dirt road leading to the cabin, and the wind had scattered shingles halfway into the trees. But Jack had made progress. He'd cleared out half the junk inside stacked firewood against the wall and found a tarp in the back shed that he'd dragged onto the roof. It wasn't much, but it kept the place from drowning during the next rain. The fire from last night had left behind a trace of warmth in the stove, like a promise not to give up yet. Still, the crack in the wall Royce had kicked open, it bothered him. Not just because of what it represented, but because something about it didn't feel right. Jack had seen buildings cracked by time, by weather, by violence. This was something else. The split ran too straight, too clean, like it had been widened before. He kept catching Scout sniffing near it, whining. And this morning when Jack leaned against the wall to move a table, he'd heard something shift. Not wood, not air, something metallic. He made a mental note to check it again, maybe pry the boards open when his hands stopped shaking. He hadn't eaten yet. Just coffee boiled black in a pot he'd scrubbed out with sand. As he wiped sweat from his brow with the sleeve of his flannel, he heard the rumble of tires on gravel. Too heavy to be a neighbor's ATV. Too smooth to be an old logging truck. Jack stepped off the porch, Scout instantly falling in beside him. The black pickup rounded the bend and crawled to a stop at the edge of the clearing. Royce Bennett stepped out in jeans too clean for the woods, sunglasses too dark for the overcast morning, and a smirk carved perfectly into place. "Didn't think you'd actually move in," he said, eyeing the cabin like it offended him. Jack didn't answer, just stood there, shoulders squared, letting Scout's low growl do the talking. Royce raised his hands in mock surrender. "Relax, just checking on family property." Jack's eyes narrowed. "Sarah left it to me." "Legally." "You said so yourself." "Right," Royce said, "but the land title's murky. County records say her great-uncle owned it but never fully transferred it. Could be grounds for reversion. I've got a lawyer digging." "You drove all the way out here to throw legal threats at me?" Jack asked. Royce grinned. "No. I came to make a deal." He walked up to the porch. Bootsteps deliberate, slow. "You don't want to be out here. You've got no water, no power. Place is crawling with black mold and God knows what else. You're sleeping with raccoons. I'm offering cash, enough to get you on your feet. Clean slate. Jack said nothing. His pulse beat like war drums behind his eyes. Come on, Jack Royce added. You were a soldier. You know when to cut your losses. Jack stepped forward, the weight of the hammer still in his back pocket. You don't know a damn thing about what I know. Royce leaned on the railing, tapping it with his ring. Suit yourself. Just know this place, it's not worth dying over. A loud crack split the air. The railing snapped under Royce's elbow and collapsed, spilling him sideways into the mud. Scout barked, tail stiff, as Royce stumbled up, shirt-stained arms flailing. Jack didn't laugh. He didn't move. Royce looked down at the broken board that had snapped beneath him, then at the wall behind it, the crack in the siding. He tilted his head. What's that? Jack stepped between him and the wall. Old house. Things fall apart. Royce's eyes stayed fixed on the split in the boards. Looks like something's back there. It's rot. Royce narrowed his eyes. You find something in there? No. Silence. Then Royce smiled again, meaner this time. Be a shame if someone called the sheriff about a trespassing dispute, or if something in there got accidentally damaged during an inspection. Jack's fists clenched. Get in your truck. Go home. Royce paused, wiped his hands on his jeans, then reached into his pocket. He tossed a folded piece of paper onto the porch, just letting you know the process has started. See you in court, soldier. He climbed back into his truck and gunned it down the road, tires spitting mud as he went. Jack watched him disappear into the trees, every muscle in his body coiled tight. When the dust settled, he stepped back onto the porch and picked up the paper. It was a copy of a land dispute filing standard junk, but enough to start a mess that could take months, maybe years, to untangle. Scout whined and nosed the crack in the wall again. Jack crouched beside him. Up close, the crack wasn't just a break in the wood, it had been widened. Tool marks. Not recent, but deliberate. Something had been placed inside, and something had shifted. Jack touched the board. Cold. He looked at Scout. We're not giving this up. Not for him, not for anyone. He went back inside, grabbed the hammer, and stared at the wall. I don't care if it kills me, he muttered again. This shack is mine now. He brought the hammer down against the edge of the board. Once. Twice. The wood split. Dust flew. Behind it, wrapped in oilcloth, was something hard square. Scout barked once, sharp and electric. Jack pulled the bundle out slowly. His hands shook, but not from fear. He unwrapped the cloth. Inside was a small wooden box, maybe the size of a shoebox, darkened with age. The metal latch was rusted, but it opened. Inside, coins. Dozens of them. Worn but unmistakably gold. Confederate currency by the look of it. And buried beneath them, a folded piece of brittle parchment. A map, or something like it. Jack stared, breath caught in his chest. His war wasn't over. It had just changed shape. Later that night, as he lit a fire and stared into its flickering shadows, Jack unfolded the paper again. Not just a map, instructions, coordinates, and symbols he didn't yet understand. Scout lay curled at his feet, eyes alert, ears twitching. Outside, the wind had died. The night was still. But something had been unearthed, and tomorrow Jack would need answers. Someone who knew what this was. Someone who remembered. And there was only one person in town he trusted with a secret this big. Maggie Rayburn. Jack stood barefoot in the cold cabin, hammer still in hand, staring at the mess he'd made. Wood splinters littered the floor. The open wall yawned like a wound. He hadn't stopped working since Royce left, couldn't. The adrenaline wouldn't let him. Not after what he found. The box sat on the table, its contents spread out like puzzle pieces from another life. 27 gold coins, each stamped with the seal of the Confederate States. Most were tarnished, but a few still gleamed under the glow of the firelight, as if they'd been waiting for this moment to come back into the world. Scout paced in small loops, ears twitching. Jack rubbed his thumb over one of the coins. E pluribus unum, barely visible, a symbol of a divided country trying to pretend it wasn't. The metal was cold, heavier than he expected, not just in weight, in meaning. Beside the coins sat the folded parchment he'd pulled from beneath them. The paper was thick, hand-drawn, and faded in all the right places to be real. A rough map of the surrounding Ozark Hills. Jagged ridgelines. Primitive symbols. A black X, another deeper mark circled in red ink, maybe blood, maybe not. Jack didn't know yet what it meant, but his gut told him this was bigger than buried coins. He glanced back at the wall. There was more in there. Had to be. Jack grabbed the flashlight he'd rigged together and clicked it on. A shaky yellow beam cut through the gap in the wall. He leaned in, pushing his arm deep into the cavity, fingers brushing against dry insulation and cobwebs. Something metallic scraped under his touch. He shifted, crouched lower, and reached again. This time his hand closed around another small parcel, wrapped in oilcloth, like the first, tied with brittle twine. He pulled it free. Scout sat down beside him, alert, but still. Jack unwrapped the cloth with care. Inside was a small journal, leather-bound, cracked at the spine. The name etched faintly on the cover, L.T. Harlan, 1865. He opened it to the first page. The handwriting was fine, cursive, steady, military. March 4th, 1865. We made it through the ridge. Jonah believes the Union patrol lost our trail, but I'm not so sure. We buried the first crate under the pine near Devil's Tooth Rock. The rest we'll divide among the cabins if we survive the week. God forgive us. Jack closed the book slowly. He'd stumbled onto a war story that never made it into textbooks. One written in shadows and survival. Scout barked just once and ran to the door, body tense. Jack stood quickly, heart thudding. He slid the journal under the floorboard and snapped the crate closed. A glance out the window showed nothing but trees and mist. He opened the door and stepped onto the porch. Nothing but the stillness of late evening. A low fog had crept into the clearing curling around the pines. The forest watched with quiet breath. Scout sniffed the air, cautious. Jack whispered, "What is it?" "Boy." Scout growled, low and uneasy, but didn't chase. That was enough. Jack stepped back inside and locked the door. He shoved a table in front of it, then turned off the flashlight and sat down by the stove where the fire had begun to die. He stared at the wall. "If this wall has secrets," he murmured, "I'll bleed 'em out." He didn't know why he said it. Maybe it was the soldier in him. Maybe it was the man who'd lost everything and was tired of being handed ghosts. But he meant it. The next morning came cold and clear. A thin crust of frost coated the windows. Jack woke on the floor, wrapped in a wool blanket, Scout curled against him like a furnace. He brewed coffee over the stove, his hands blackened with ash. He flipped through the journal again while he sipped. Some entries were mundane notes about firewood and sickness, but others hinted at movement, relocation, secrecy. Names kept popping up. Jonah, Reeves, Bellamy, and one symbol repeated on several pages, a crude triangle with a dot in the center. Jack copied it into his notebook. The map, the journal, the coins, they weren't just leftovers from a retreating army. This was a network, hidden routes, Caches. A last stand, maybe. And someone had gone to a hell of a lot of trouble to hide it. Jack needed help. Not just any help. Someone who knew the land, who understood how old stories lived beneath it. He grabbed his coat, wrapped the journal tight, and whistled for Scout. "We're going into town," he said. "Let's see if Maggie still answers her door." The drive into town was rough. The mud had dried just enough to make the trail slick and rutted. Jack's sedan fishtailed once near a bend, but he kept it steady. Pine Hollow was the kind of place people drove through without stopping. Just a post office gas station and a diner that hadn't changed its menu since the Reagan years. Maggie Rayburn lived in a small bungalow on the edge of town just past the elementary school. A place filled with wind chimes and lavender plants and chipped garden gnomes. Jack pulled into her driveway and cut the engine. Scout barked once from the back seat, then settled. Jack climbed the steps and knocked twice. A moment later, the door opened. Maggie stood there in jeans and a paint-streaked sweatshirt, her silver hair pulled into a low braid. She looked tired but kind. Always kind. "Jack," she said, surprised. "Didn't expect to see you out of the woods." "Didn't expect to come out," he replied. He held up the journal wrapped tight in cloth. "Can I come in?" She stepped aside. "You hungry?" Jack nodded. Always. Over coffee and scrambled eggs, Jack laid it all out minus the exact location. He told her about the crack in the wall, the coins, the map, and the journal. Her eyes narrowed at the mention of Confederate gold. "Lots of myths about treasure in these hills," she said, "but most of them come up empty. This one feels different." She studied him. "You look different." He didn't answer. Instead, he opened the journal to a page marked with the triangle symbol. "You ever seen this?" She blinked, then stood and walked to a bookshelf. After a moment, she pulled down a battered historical survey of Civil War movement in the Ozarks. She flipped through the index. Her fingers stopped. "Here," she said, placing the book in front of him. "The Triangle's Watch. Local legend. Said to be a code between deserters and smugglers during the last days of the war. Safe paths. Hidden stockpiles." She pointed to a spot on the old survey map. Jack leaned in. It was the same region marked on his parchment. Maggie looked up at him. "Whatever you found out there, Jack, it's part of something bigger." He nodded. "I think it's just the start." As Jack got up to leave, Maggie touched his arm. "Be careful," she said. "History doesn't like being dug up." He gave a small smile. "Neither do I." He opened the door, Scout already waiting. As he stepped into the afternoon sun, one thing was clear: Royce wasn't his only problem now. Someone else had buried these things for a reason. And whatever waited beneath Devil's Tooth Rock, it wasn't just gold. It was something that had survived 150 years of silence. And silence always comes with a cost. Jack couldn't stop hearing Maggie's voice as he drove back toward the cabin, her warning echoing like an old war radio broadcast stuck on repeat. The Triangle's Watch. Confederate deserters. Secret trails and stashes hidden in the mountains like bones beneath skin. He'd gone into town looking for answers. What he'd gotten was a roadmap into something ancient, buried, and dangerous. Scout shifted in the passenger seat, his head resting against the door, but ears alert. Jack reached over and gave him a scratch behind the neck. "Yeah," he muttered. "I feel it too." The closer they got to the cabin, the quieter the forest became. No birdsong, no wind. Just the soft rumble of tires over gravel and the faint creak of the suspension with every bump in the road. By the time they reached the clearing, the light was fading. The sun had dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows across the porch. The cabin looked the same, quiet, still, and slightly off-kilter, like it was holding its breath. Jack Park got out and walked slowly toward the door. Every step felt heavier than the last. Scout followed, nose low to the ground. Inside, the air had shifted. Not physically, not in a way you could measure. But Jack had spent enough nights in foreign towns where death slept behind thin walls. He recognized the feeling now. The cabin was watching him. He set the journal and map back on the table and stood for a moment, arms crossed, staring down at the coins. They gleamed faintly in the low light, innocent and deadly all at once. He didn't know what made him look toward the window, but he did, and froze. Across the clearing near the edge of the woods stood a man, still, silent, dressed in hunting camo, too still to be just passing by. Jack didn't move. Neither did the figure. Scout let out a deep growl from low in his throat. Jack blinked and the man was gone. Gone without a sound. Jack yanked the door open, stepping onto the porch. He scanned the trees, the trail, even the cabin roofline. Nothing. No movement. Just the forest swallowing itself again. Scout bolted down the steps, barking sharply, running toward the tree line. "Scout," Jack shouted, following without thinking. The air was thick, cold, and smelled of wet leaves. The trees closed around him, fast, choking the last light from the sky. He followed the sound of Scout's barking through brush and roots, his boots slipping on wet ground. Then silence. Too fast. Too complete. Jack stopped, turned in a slow circle. "Scout," he called. Louder this time. No response. Panic clawed at his chest, cold and hard. He was just about to run when a rustle broke to his right. Then Scout came bounding out of the dark, tongue out, tail down, nervous but safe. Jack exhaled, crouching to grab his collar. "You scared the hell out of me," he whispered. "Next time, bark once and wait." Scout whined, then turned his head back toward the woods. There, wedged under a tree root, Jack saw something white. He stepped forward and picked it up, a piece of fabric. Old, brittle, a torn edge of what looked like a Confederate flag. Jack stared at it. "Some treasures come wrapped in curses," he muttered. He and Scout walked back to the cabin in silence. But something had changed now. This wasn't just about gold or history. Someone was out here, and someone didn't want this story uncovered. That night, Jack couldn't sleep. He kept the fire going and the journal on his lap, reading page after page by flickering light. The entries grew more frantic with each turn. March 6th. Reeves caught fever. Bellamy says we dig deeper. They'll never find it. I keep dreaming of soldiers clawing through dirt, eyes black as pitch. I want to go home, but there's no home left. March 9th. We sealed the second crate inside the Devil's Tooth. Used the powder to cover the scent trail. If we make it out, we go south. If we die, let this stay buried. Jack paused, then read that line again, sealed the second crate inside the Devil's Tooth. He opened the map and traced the red circle. The symbol next to it was that same triangle with dot emblem. Beneath it faintly was scrawled in pencil, "To find what's lost, follow where the shadows lean." He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his jaw. Devil's Tooth. Sounded like a bluff or an outcropping. He'd seen something like that before, east of the ridge. A jagged formation poking out of the tree line, shaped almost like a canine tooth. Scout looked up at him, eyes reflecting the firelight. "We go tomorrow," Jack said. "Bring gear. Bring the map. Don't tell anyone." Scout thumped his tail once. Jack reached into the fire and threw the piece of the flag in. The cloth curled and blackened, then vanished into ash. The coins stayed on the table silent, but the air felt colder around them now, like something watching. At first light, Jack loaded his pack flashlight rope, a hunting knife, and the journal. He left the coins behind, buried in a box under a loose floorboard. He had no idea who might be creeping through those woods, and he wasn't about to carry gold into a cave. The air outside was crisp. Frost still clung to the edges of the brush, but the sun was up. Barely. Jack stood on the porch and scanned the woods again. No figure. No watcher. He turned toward the trail. Devil's Tooth wasn't far. Maybe 3 miles as the crow flies, but the terrain would double that. Scout padded ahead, nose to the ground, tail flicking with focus. The trail curved uphill, then narrowed. Jack climbed over fallen trees, ducked under branches, and kept checking the map, cross-referencing it with memory. He knew these woods better than most, but even he felt something unnatural about this path. Time didn't move right here. Every step felt like a heartbeat out of sync. Then, around a bend, the rocks began to change. The trees thinned, and suddenly there it was. Devil's Tooth. A jagged formation of dark limestone jutting up like a fang from the ground. It didn't belong to the hill. It rose out of it, cutting through the moss and dirt like a buried weapon. Jack approached slowly. The air here felt wrong, denser somehow, like walking into a room full of whispers. The map had shown an entrance. He circled the rock once. Nothing. Then twice. And on the third time, behind a wall of ferns, Scout began to paw at the ground. Barked once, sharp and alert. Jack joined him. Together they cleared away the growth, and there, half covered in soil, was a narrow gap between the stone and the earth. A doorway. Jack ran his fingers along the edge. Old stone. Hand-chiseled, maybe. Someone had carved this. He looked at Scout. "Well, hell," he muttered. "You were right." Scout wagged his tail once, then stood still. The sun was dropping fast behind the ridge. Jack knelt down, took a breath, and lit his flashlight. "Let's go see what they were so scared of hiding." And with that, he stepped into the dark. The flashlight beam trembled slightly as Jack moved deeper into the passage. The narrow opening behind Devil's Tooth Rock had widened just enough to let him crouch and move forward. But the air thickened with every step. Not just with dampness or mildew, but with something colder. Older. Scout followed close behind, ears flattened, every pawfall cautious. The walls of the tunnel were jagged limestone, scraped and chipped by human hands. Tool marks. Not from mining, no. These were carved for hiding, not extracting. Jack ran his hand across a groove etched into the right wall. A symbol. Faint. A triangle with a dot inside. Again. He didn't say anything. His breath fogged in the narrow space. The silence wasn't natural. It felt sealed, like the world outside had been left behind the moment they crossed that threshold. 30 feet in the tunnel split. To the left, the passage dipped sharply into darkness. To the right, the air grew colder, but more open. He turned right. The space opened into a small chamber, just tall enough to stand. The flashlight revealed something immediately, a wooden crate half-rotted, bound in rusted iron bands. Jack's heart thudded. He stepped closer, crouched. The crate had been wedged between 2 stone pillars. Someone had taken care to hide it from casual eyes. He cleared away the dust and cobwebs with his gloved hand. Scout whined. "Yeah, I know," Jack whispered. "Feels wrong." He pulled out his hunting knife and wedged the blade under the crate's lid. With a groan of old nails and splinters, it popped open. Gold. More coins. Smaller, duller, but definitely Confederate, nestled in cloth that had long since gone to powder. But beneath them was something else. A book, leather-bound, no title, locked with a small brass latch snapped in half. He opened it. Inside were names, dozens of them, first and last, some with ranks, some with dates next to them, others crossed out. Beside the list was a handwritten symbol, again the triangle and dot, but now accompanied by a phrase, Custodes Ultima. The Last Watchers. Jack felt a chill rake down his spine. Scout barked once. Short, urgent. Jack turned. Someone was there. A figure. Just at the edge of the tunnel entrance. Shadowed, unmoving. He froze. "Who's there?" Jack called, voice echoing against stone. The figure didn't answer. Jack reached for his flashlight, then remembered it was still in his hand. He pointed it directly where the figure had been, gone. "Hell no," Jack muttered. Scout growled low, steady. They moved fast. Jack stuffed the journal into his bag, grabbed a fistful of coins, slammed the crate lid shut, and backed out of the chamber. Every instinct in him screamed, "Leave now." He turned the corner back toward the main tunnel and nearly dropped the light. There were marks on the wall that hadn't been there before, scrawled in something black and flaking. Letters, or names: Bellamy, Reeves, Jonah, the same names from the journal. Then under them, newly added in a shaky hand, Cooper. Jack's blood went cold. That was Sarah's maiden name. He turned and ran. Scout kept pace, feet pounding the uneven floor. They reached the mouth of the cave just as the last rays of sunlight flickered through the trees. Jack stumbled out into the clearing and fell to one knee, panting. The woods were still. Birds chirped in the distance. The world was normal again. But his hands were shaking. He sat for a long moment, Scout leaning against him. Then he looked down at the journal in his lap and opened it again, flipping through to a marked page near the middle. April 1st. Bellamy is changing. The others feel it too. He talks in circles now. Won't sleep. Says the gold speaks to him. Jonah tried to leave. He vanished that night. We buried what was left. I no longer believe we are guarding it. I think we're trapped by it. Jack looked at Scout. It wasn't the gold that cursed them. It was what they took to keep it hidden. The coins were a decoy, a distraction. Whatever this triangle's watch was, it didn't just bury treasure. It buried secrets, and it hadn't wanted to be found. By the time Jack returned to the cabin, the sky was navy blue and the stars blinked through cracks in the clouds. He locked the door behind him, checked the window latches, then set the journal on the table and spread out the coins beside it. There were markings on some of them he hadn't noticed before. Tiny etchings along the rims. Not mint marks, not numbers. Coordinates. He grabbed a pen and paper and began copying them down. They aligned too cleanly to be random. He compared them with the map Maggie had pointed out. Small areas scattered throughout the hills, all connected by that triangle symbol. Safe houses, supply caches, or graves. Scout whined and laid his head on Jack's boot. "You think I'm losing it?" Jack said softly. He leaned back and stared at the ceiling. Someone had followed him. Someone had written Sarah's name on that wall. Why was she connected to this? Was her family part of this Last Watcher's cult? Or had she just inherited something by blood she didn't even know existed, and if so, was that why she died? Jack stood suddenly. He couldn't sit anymore. Couldn't breathe in this cabin full of rotting wood and whispers. He opened the door and stepped onto the porch. The woods were dark, still, too still. Then from somewhere deep in the trees, a whistle carried through the night. Low, slow, like a lullaby. Scout bolted upright, growling. Jack's skin crawled. He didn't recognize the tune, but he knew what it meant. He wasn't alone out here. He stepped back inside, shut the door, and slid the lock into place. Then he lit the lantern, took out the map again, and circled the next marked location closest to the cave. If he wanted answers, he had to go deeper. Tomorrow he'd head there, but not alone. It was time to ask Maggie what she wasn't telling him. Because this wasn't about a war anymore. It was about what had survived it. The sun was barely cutting through the pines when Jack pulled up to Maggie's house again. The engine idled low, tired from the miles it had clawed through mud and gravel, but he didn't shut it off right away. He just sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel like it might tell him what to do next. Scout whined softly from the passenger seat, as if to say, "Get it over with." Jack nodded. "You're right." He killed the engine, stepped out, and walked up the path, boots crunching over gravel and dead leaves. The wind had picked up dry and cold with the scent of pine and something faintly acrid riding its smoke from somewhere. Controlled burn, maybe, or maybe not. He knocked 3 times. No answer. Another knock. Still nothing. He tried the door. It opened. Inside the house was silent. The air was thick with old wood and burnt coffee. A half-eaten breakfast sat on the kitchen counter, scrambled eggs congealed on the plate, toast barely nibbled a mug of coffee. Gone cold. Maggie Jack called. Nothing. Scout padded in behind him, nose twitching. He barked once, sharp. Jack moved fast through the house, checking each room. Bedroom bed made clothes still in the closet. Bathroom medicine cabinet open, pill bottles untouched. Then the study. That's where he found it. The bookshelf Maggie had pulled the Civil War volume from was tipped slightly. One book on the floor. Southern Arcane Symbols, a Regional Study. Jack bent down and picked it up. The corner had been folded. A page marked in pencil, Custodes Ultima, the Last Watchers. He scanned it. Believed to be a small, isolated group of Confederate deserters and local sympathizers who adopted esoteric rituals in the final months of the war. Some accounts claim they were charged with hiding stolen gold, but others suggest their true purpose was containment of something older. Something not of this world. Jack closed the book slowly. Something older. He backed out of the study and scanned the living room again. Maggie's keys were gone. So was her coat. But the silence pressed in like a warning. Then his phone buzzed. A text. From an unknown number. Back where it started. You need to understand before it's too late. M. Jack stared at it. He didn't know what back where it started meant, but he had a hunch. He was already moving before he'd finished thinking. He jogged back to the truck, Scout jumping into the passenger seat before the door had even opened. He pulled away from the house tires, kicking up dust, heart pounding. Back where it started. That had to mean the first symbol on the map. The place circled not in red like the others, but black. The cabin. The drive back was faster than it should have been. Jack took the corners hard, chewing up gravel, ignoring the rattle of the engine. Scout stayed steady, eyes forward alert. As they turned onto the trail leading to the clearing, Jack saw it. A figure crouched in front of the cabin. Maggie. She was kneeling by the wall Jack had torn open. He slammed the truck into park and jumped out. Maggie. She didn't flinch. just looked over her shoulder, her face pale but calm. "You found the journal?" she asked. Jack nodded, approaching slowly. "And more." Maggie exhaled and stood. "I hoped you wouldn't." Jack frowned. "Why?" She stared at the open wall where the crate had been hidden. "Because they didn't bury it to protect the treasure," she said softly. "They buried it to protect us." Jack's stomach tightened. Maggie stepped into the cabin, moving with slow familiarity. "You ever wonder why the stories about Confederate gold never added up? Why every search ended in silence, or worse, I'm starting to," Jack said. She turned. "My great-grandfather was part of the watch. So was Sarah's." Jack blinked. "What? They passed it down quietly, secretly. Not the gold. The warning." Maggie gestured to the journal. It wasn't about protecting wealth. It was about guarding something that came with it. Something they shouldn't have touched. She reached into her coat and pulled out an old envelope. She handed it to Jack. Inside was a photo, black and white, faded. A group of men standing outside Devil's Tooth holding lanterns. Behind them, etched faintly into the stone, was the triangle symbol. And something else. Eyes. Carved into the rock behind them. Watching. "I thought it was just legend," Maggie whispered. "But then you went out there. You found it. And now it's waking up." Jack swallowed hard. "What is it?" "We don't know. We never knew. Only that it drove the Watchers mad. Turned them against each other. Some disappeared. Others died raving. The gold was a lure. A trap." Jack clenched his jaw. "And now I've brought it into the open." Maggie looked at him. "That's why I came here. To help seal it again." He glanced around. "How I need the map. The real one. Not the copy." Jack hesitated, then pulled it from his coat and handed it over. Maggie unfolded it on the table. She placed a small stone on one corner, then drew a new mark near the cabin. A triangle inside a circle. "We have one chance," she said. "The next point is tomorrow night. The old Watchers used natural alignments to contain it. It's written in the journal. Look closely at the April entries." Jack reached for the book, flipped to the page. April 5th. The sky shifts. The stars move into place. Bellamy says it's the last gate. If we fail to mark it, it opens again. A cold sweat broke across Jack's back. "I don't know how to stop something I don't understand," he said. "You don't have to stop it," Maggie replied. "You just have to seal it." "One more time." Scout barked suddenly, spinning toward the door. Outside, the trees rustled not from wind, but movement. Maggie's face went rigid. "They're here." Who, Jack asked. But he already knew. That night, the cabin turned into a war room. Jack and Maggie blocked the doors, set up lanterns, mapped out the triangle formation they'd need to replicate the Watcher's original seal. It had to be physical markers at 3 points around the Devil's Tooth site. One by the bluff, one in the creek bed, one at the cabin. "We'll start at dawn," Maggie said, "before it gets strong again." Jack nodded, but sleep didn't come easy. Scout paced all night, growling at shadows, and far off, just before sunrise, Jack heard it again. That whistle. Only this time, it was closer. The woods were quiet, but it was the wrong kind of quiet, the kind that crushed every sound under a weight you couldn't see. Jack stood just outside the cabin, shoulders squared, staring into the mist that had crept in like a ghost. Behind him, Maggie checked and rechecked her bag, laying out the tools they'd need, like sacred instruments, chalk, old nails wrapped in twine, a rusted compass salt in a leather pouch. Nothing high-tech. All handed down from old stories and older hands. Scout stood between them, pacing tail stiff. Maggie said the watchers used these marks of grounding to seal the points after burying the gold. Not to protect it, but to lock away whatever force it carried. Madness, darkness, she didn't know what to call it. She just knew the seal was failing. Jack had seen enough already to believe her. They'd agreed to start with the closest marker, the creek bed. If they got that one done by sunrise, the bluff and the cabin could follow before the window closed. Jack double-checked his sidearm before tucking it under his coat. Not because he thought bullets could stop whatever this was, but because holding something solid made him feel sane. They set out on foot, the air damp and heavy. The world was just beginning to blush with light, those first few minutes of dawn, when everything looks like it's holding its breath. As they descended the trail toward the dry creek, Maggie kept her voice low. The original watchers didn't just die. Some vanished. Others killed each other. A few wandered off and were found days later talking about the stars, or hearing voices in trees. Jack didn't speak. He just listened. The way a man listens before a storm. They left clues behind, she continued. One of them wrote in his journal that the thing they tried to seal wasn't from the cave. It was drawn to it, like a flame to breath. Jack finally asked, "So what happens if we fail?" Maggie hesitated. "It spreads." The answer landed cold in his chest. Scout barked once and darted forward. Jack rushed after him, gun drawn, only to find the clearing ahead empty, just the old creek bed snaking through the trees, dry and littered with rock. The first marker was somewhere here. Maggie pulled out the compass, holding it flat in her palm. "It's iron-based," she said. "Don't ask how it works. Just tell me if it spins." Jack watched. The needle jerked left, then trembled. It didn't spin, just pulsed, like it was pointing at something alive. She nodded. There. They moved to a spot just beside a twisted tree stump. The bark had peeled long ago, leaving it white and splintered like bone. Maggie began to trace a symbol into the dirt with a piece of chalk, then surrounded it with the salt from her pouch, forming a ring. Jack kept lookout, scanning the woods. Scout stayed still, watching the chalk. Maggie hammered 3 iron nails into the dirt in a triangle, whispering something Jack couldn't quite hear. The wind changed. Jack felt it before he saw it. A chill that moved against the direction of the breeze. The hairs on his arms rose. Then a sound behind them. A creak, like a tree limb under too much weight. Jack spun, eyes darting. Nothing. But something had been there. Scout growled low and steady. "It's watching," Maggie whispered, standing slowly. "Let's move." They hurried back up the trail toward the bluff. The second marker. It took longer to find. The light had grown stronger, but so had the feeling pressure in the chest, like being underwater. Every step uphill made Jack feel heavier. His thoughts thickened. He forgot what he was reaching for mid-motion. Maggie stumbled once and didn't seem to notice. "It's getting in," she murmured. "What has Jack asked?" But she didn't answer. At the bluff's edge, they found the old cairn, a pile of stones long since overgrown with moss. Jack cleared the top layer while Maggie crouched again, repeating the ritual. Chalk, salt, nails. She drew the same sigil as before. Then Scout barked sharply and ran to the edge of the bluff. Jack followed and froze. Across the valley near the base of Devil's Tooth, 3 figures stood in a triangle. Not moving, not blinking, just watching. too far to see clearly. But Jack knew they weren't alive, at least not in any way that still made sense. Maggie joined him, breath shallow. "They're echoes," she said. "Memories burned into the ground." "Are they dangerous?" She looked at him. "Only if you acknowledge them." Jack didn't blink, didn't breathe. And after a long moment, the figures turned, vanishing back into the tree line without a sound. He exhaled. "This thing, this watcher, why now?" he asked. "Why come back after all this time?" Maggie stood, brushing dirt from her hands. "Because someone disturbed its prison." She looked him in the eye. "You." They made it back to the cabin before noon. The third point, the last seal. Jack didn't wait. He cleared the floor, brushed away dust, and helped Maggie draw the final triangle. It wasn't just chalk this time. She mixed it with ash from the burned flag, pressed it into the boards. Then, at the center, she placed one of the Confederate coins from the original crate. "A token," she explained. "It needs a piece of the curse to hold it shut." Jack handed her the journal. "Then it needs this too." Maggie nodded and laid it beside the coin. She poured a circle of salt around them both, then tapped the iron nails in a tight triangle formation. The room grew colder. Jack shivered. "Now what? We wait." And they did. For hours they sat in silence, Scout curled between them. The sun dipped low, and just before the horizon swallowed it, a sound split the air. A scream, distant, choked, not human. Jack bolted upright. Outside, the trees shuddered. Wind howled through the gaps in the boards. The fire flickered violently, then died. The cabin darkened. Scout whined. Maggie lit a lantern, her hands shaking. That was it. Jack looked out the window. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. But he could feel it. The seal had held. For now. He turned back toward Maggie. "This won't be the last time, will it?" She didn't smile. Didn't blink. "No," she said. "Because sealing something that wants to be found is like trying to bury a scream." Jack looked down at the map. One triangle closed, but two more had begun to glow. Jack had been quiet for hours. Since sealing the cabin, he'd poo-pooed it like someone walking through a dream. They couldn't wake from half alert, fully exhausted, every nerve wired but dulled by something heavier than fear. It wasn't over. Maggie knew it. Scout knew it. And somewhere deep in Jack's bones, he knew it too. The seal had closed, but it hadn't settled. The map confirmed it. Two new triangles had begun to glow faintly when touched by flame. One in the northern ridge. The other to the west, near a place labeled Cooper's Gulch, a name Jack hadn't noticed before. Until now. He stared at it like a bruise forming under glass. Cooper. His late wife's family name. Sarah never talked much about her father's people, he said, suddenly eyes still locked on the map. Said they were stubborn, secretive. Didn't like visitors. Lived out near the old quarry? Near there. Maggie didn't look surprised. Her grandfather was one of the last active watchers, she said. Most of them died out by the 60s. He stayed. Some think he went mad. Jack looked at her. And no one thought to tell me this before I married her. It wasn't about you, she said gently. It was about what she might carry. Jack stood and began to pace. Scout followed each movement with his eyes, tail low, unsettled. I need to see it, Jack muttered. I need to know what she was born into, what she never got to tell me. Maggie didn't argue, But as Jack grabbed his coat, she stopped him with a hand on his arm. "You sure about this?" she asked. "The closer you get, the harder it'll be to walk away." Jack's eyes were like steel. She died without answers. "I won't." The road to Cooper's Gulch was narrow, winding, and overgrown. Jack drove slow headlights, pushing back mist and branches like a blade. Maggie sat in the passenger seat, Scout in the back, both of them watching the woods, as if expecting them to blink. Cooper's Gulch wasn't a town, not really. Just a scattering of collapsed barns and sagging houses long abandoned. What had once been a mining outpost was now a ghost of rust and rotten timber. But one building still stood. An old chapel. Weathered white paint peeled from its wood slats. The bell tower was half collapsed, the roof patched with tin and hope. A rusted sign hung crooked over the door. Cooper Family Union, 1871. "This place was never about God," Maggie said as they stepped out. Jack said nothing. He walked toward the building slowly, each step crunching gravel and bone-dry leaves. Scout stopped short of the door, growling low. Jack opened it anyway. The smell inside was of dust decay, and something coppery beneath it, old and clinging. The pews had been pushed aside to form a large circle in the middle of the chapel floor. At the center was a stone basin ringed in ash. Symbols carved into the floorboards, again the triangle with dot, but now warped, twisted. One had a second dot inside it. Someone tried to continue the rituals, Maggie whispered, stepping carefully around the edge of the circle. Jack moved to the basin. He looked in. Empty, but not clean. Streaks of black dried and hardened. Not paint. Blood. He stepped back. This wasn't sealing anything, he said. This was feeding it. He turned to Maggie. "She never came here. She couldn't have." "No," Maggie said. "But someone with her name did." She pulled something from her coat pocket and handed it to him. A torn photograph, same chapel decades earlier. Men in dark coats. A girl at the center, holding a lantern. Cooper women were the keepers, she said. They passed the knowledge through daughters, nieces, granddaughters. Your wife may not have known, but she belonged to it. Jack stared at the photo, the edges trembling in his hands. "You don't just inherit blood," he said quietly. "You inherit the promises it broke." Then Scout barked a sharp, panicked sound. They turned toward the rear of the chapel. A door stood slightly ajar. No wind, no draft, just open. Jack approached slowly, pistol drawn. He nudged the door wider. Steps leading down. Stone. Worn. He looked at Maggie. "You coming?" She hesitated, then nodded. Together they descended into the dark. The basement was cold, the air thick with moisture and mold. Their flashlights cut beams through dust so heavy it looked like fog. The walls were lined with crates, boxes, jars, most broken, their contents long decayed. But one corner was different. A table. Clean. Lit by a single oil lamp that hadn't been lit in years. On it another journal. Jack opened it carefully. The handwriting was Sarah's. But the entries were dated after her death. Maggie read over his shoulder from 3rd. "I don't know why he's dreaming about the cave. I don't remember it. But something in me does. I feel it in the marrow. June 6th, he's getting closer. The wall will crack soon. I can feel it from here. If he opens it, I need to be ready. June 9th. I miss him. I wish I could explain. But I wasn't supposed to know. I wasn't supposed to carry it. But the blood chose me anyway. Jack dropped the journal, stumbled back. No. Maggie picked it up carefully, closing it. There's more to this than death and dirt. She might have left more behind than you knew. Jack's throat felt dry. But she died. I buried her. Maggie looked at the journal. Did you ever see her body? He froze. No. The car exploded. I thought. But his thoughts collapsed under their own weight. Something clicked into place, cold and wrong. Maggie moved to a shelf and brushed dust off a sealed tin box. She handed it to him. Inside dog tags. Sarah's. But the chain was new. Clean. Jack looked at her eyes wide. Why would someone plant this because someone didn't want you asking questions? Until now. Scout barked again, this time frantic, from outside. Jack turned and ran up the stairs, Maggie behind him. They burst through the chapel door, and the woods were burning, not with fire but light, golden, shifting, like molten glass. Shapes moved through it. Figures. The same ones from the bluff. Jack's voice cracked. What the hell is happening? Maggie stepped forward, her face pale. The second seal. It's opening itself. Jack's chest tightened, and somewhere beneath the earth he felt it rise. Sarah's voice. Soft inside his skull. You were never meant to find me. But he had. And now it was coming for all of them. The light outside the chapel pulsed like a living thing. Jack stood frozen in the doorway, eyes wide, heart racing, as the golden glow licked through the trees in waves. Not flames, not fire. It shimmered like heat off blacktop, warping the woods, bending shadows, until they twisted into shapes that didn't make sense. Figures moved inside the light, too tall, too thin, gliding rather than walking. Scout growled low beside him, his hackles raised. Maggie stepped up next to Jack, her face pale and still. This isn't a vision, she said softly. This is it bleeding through. The veil's thinning. Jack tore his gaze away from the light and looked back at the journal, the one written in Sarah's handwriting, dated after her death. Her voice still echoed faintly in his head, a memory he wasn't sure belonged to him or something else entirely. You were never meant to find me. She's not dead, Jack said suddenly. The words left his mouth before he fully understood them. Not completely. Maggie turned to him slowly. What are you saying? She's not gone, Jack said again, firmer this time. She's trapped in whatever they tried to bury. Silence stretched between them as the pulsing light grew brighter. Then Maggie whispered, and now it wants you to open the rest. Jack's hands curled into fists. No, I'm not finishing what they started. I'm ending it. But how, she asked. It took generations just to contain it. They tried everything, seals, symbols, blood sacrifices. Nothing lasted. Jack's mind raced. There has to be a different way. Not through rituals or hiding. Through understanding what it actually is. Maggie frowned. You want to talk to it? I want to find her, Jack said. And I think that means going into the last place she touched, where her blood still lingers. Maggie's expression hardened. The cave. Jack nodded. Devil's Tooth, he said. That's where it started, and where it has to end. They packed in silence. Lanterns rope the journal chalk weapons. Jack took Sarah's dog tags and slipped them into his pocket. They felt warm, almost humming against his skin. Maggie collected more salt-fresh nails and the old compass. Scout never left Jack's side tense and twitching. As they climbed into the truck, the sky overhead had turned a sickly gold even though the sun had long since set. The forest groaned as if alive. Branches swayed without wind. No birds. No crickets. Just the pulse. Jack drove. Fast. They reached the trail leading to Devil's Tooth just as the first of the trees began to bend inward, like drawn by gravity toward the formation. The rock towered ahead, black against the glowing sky, and at its base the entrance to the cave yawned open wider than before. Breathing. Jack parked and killed the engine. The world went eerily still. "You don't have to come," he said to Maggie. She snorted. "You're not leaving me behind with that out here." Scout barked once, sharp, determined. The three of them stepped toward the cave. Inside, the air was colder than it had been days before. No mist this time, just a dry, stale chill that sucked the moisture from Jack's mouth. The walls still held the Watcher markings, but something new had been added. Fresh carvings. Not made with hands, but with pressure scrapes and burns etched in spirals, symbols that flickered when touched with light. Further in, they passed the broken crate Jack had first found, the one with the Confederate coins. Now empty. Maggie noticed first. "They're gone," she whispered. Jack frowned. "I hid them under the floorboard. These were others." "Or they moved," she said, voice tight. "Whatever this is, it's not bound by space anymore. It's leaking into the real." Deeper into the cave, the rock changed. Smoothed. Polished like it had melted and hardened again. Then they saw the chamber. Massive. Circular. In the center, a stone slab covered in the triangle within dot symbol. And on top of it, a figure. Wrapped in old fabric. Unmoving. Jack's chest locked. He stepped forward slowly, breath caught halfway between hope and horror. It was a body, but not rotted. Preserved. Skin pale. Hair black. Hands folded over a small journal. His hand shook as he reached for the journal. On the cover, S.C. Sarah Cooper. Jack opened it. The first page held only one line scrawled in her handwriting. "If you've come this far, you already know the truth." The second page, I said yes. I let it in. Because it offered me you. Jack's throat clenched. The light from the cave walls pulsed again, stronger. Behind him, Maggie stumbled. Scout barked and pressed against Jack's leg. "What is this place?" she gasped. "It feels wrong." Jack gripped the journal. "It's not a prison. It's a bargaining table." "What?" He turned to her. "They didn't seal something evil. They negotiated with it, made deals, swore oaths, traded bloodlines for protection." Maggie stared in horror. "You think Sarah made a deal?" Jack looked back at the figure on the slab. "I think she tried to break one." Suddenly the cave shook. A low rumble like laughter pressed through stone. Scout barked wildly. A fissure split the floor near the slab, releasing a gust of wind that carried whispers, not voices, but feelings. Regret, grief, hunger. Maggie backed up. "We have to go, now." But Jack didn't move. He looked down at Sarah's face. Peaceful. Too peaceful. He touched her hand. Warm. His vision blurred. Then a flash. He was inside the memory. Sarah's memory. Standing at the edge of the chapel, holding the same lantern as in the photo. A man spoke to her, faceless, shadowed. "You can save him," the voice said, "but you'll stay with us." She nodded. and the light consumed her. Jack gasped, stumbling back into the present. She chose this, he whispered, to stop it. She sacrificed herself. Maggie stared, stunned. And now what? The walls pulsed brighter. Cracks spread across the chamber ceiling. Scout barked and spun in a circle, whining. Jack looked down at Sarah's journal again. A final line appeared as if written by invisible ink, just now surfacing. You have to finish what I started. Jack clenched his jaw. He turned to Maggie. We seal this place from the inside. One last time. Her eyes widened. Jack, that could kill us. He shook his head. It's the only way to keep it from spreading. This was never about hiding gold. It was about burying a promise. He handed Maggie the map. If I don't make it burn this. Maggie looked like she wanted to argue, but she saw it in his face. Resolved. Done running. Jack turned to Scout. Stay with her. Scout whimpered but obeyed, stepping back. Jack stepped onto the slab beside Sarah's body. The walls began to collapse inward as he reached for the symbol beneath them. And the world went dark. Silence, then breath, then darkness. Jack didn't know if he was alive or dead. The difference felt like a thin veil. He opened his eyes and saw nothing but shifting shadows. Cold air wrapped around him like a wet sheet. There was no up or down, no floor, no weight, just in between. Then came the voices, not words, not clear, just murmurs brushing past his ears, like people whispering in the next room of a dream. He tried to move, but the world didn't move with him. Shapes floated around him, faces that never fully formed, eyes without bodies, and in the far distance something pulsing, like a heart that wasn't his. He wasn't in the cave anymore. He was inside the thing, inside them. Sarah, he called out, or thought he did. His voice didn't echo. It didn't even sound like it belonged to him anymore. Then a flicker, a light. He turned toward it not with his body, but with will, like thought was the only motion that still worked here. The light grew brighter, warmer, and suddenly he was standing, not floating, not fading. He was somewhere. The room looked like a memory, his childhood living room. The couch, the crooked family photo, the scratch in the hardwood where he'd dropped a toolbox at 17. But it wasn't real. He felt that in his bones. Sarah stood in front of the fireplace, her back to him. Same dark hair, same blue flannel shirt she'd always worn on stormy days. He moved toward her slowly, afraid the moment would crack if he rushed it. Sarah, he said again, voice trembling. She turned. Her eyes were glassy, but her smile was real, painful, familiar. Hey, Jack. He nearly collapsed. I thought you were dead, he said. I was supposed to be, she replied. She looked down at her hands, pale, blurred at the edges. But they wouldn't let me go. Who? Jack asked, stepping closer. The ones we buried, she said. The ones who made the pact. She looked up at him. They aren't ghosts. They're remnants. Pieces left behind when a promise breaks. Jack shook his head. I don't understand. Sarah moved to the window, pulling back the curtain. Outside was not the street he remembered, it was Devil's Tooth, but twisted. The rock spire bent into a spiral. Trees hung upside down. Light bled from the ground instead of the sky. They wanted protection, she said. During the war, they found something ancient in those caves, something not meant for us. And they bargained with it. She turned back to him. In exchange for hiding it, they asked for strength, for secrecy, for safety. But every deal came with a price. Jack felt the weight in his chest deepen. Blood. Sarah nodded. Bloodlines. Generations of silence, of memory, of debt. Jack looked around. Is this place real? It's the in-between, she said, where broken oaths collect, where the unfinished wait. She stepped toward him now, her eyes suddenly pleading. I tried to end it. I said yes so it would take me, not you. But now you've opened the door. Jack felt something cold crawl up his spine. Then help me close it. I can't, she said. Not from here. But you can. You're still tied to the living. You still remember. He didn't understand how memory could fix any of this. But then Sarah reached up and touched his chest right over his heart. It's not death that binds them, it's the unfinished, she whispered. Finish what they started. Make it right. Jack felt a rush of heat, and then blinding white. He woke with a gasp. Back in the cave, but the slab was crumbling beneath him. The walls of the chamber cracked and howled, the ceiling sagging. Scout barked furiously at the entrance. Jack rolled off the stone, clutching Sarah's journal tight to his chest. Her body was gone. So was the pulsing gold. Maggie rushed forward, dragging him up by the arm. You're alive, she breathed. He could barely speak. She's here. Somewhere in the in-between. She's still trying to hold it back. Maggie didn't ask questions. She just nodded. Then she handed him something. A small vial of her grandfather's blood passed down and kept for generations. The last relic of the Watchers. It's all I have left, she said. You know what to do. Jack looked at the journal, then at the floor beneath them, where the old triangle symbol glowed faintly beneath the dust. He stepped into the center. This has to end, he said. He opened the journal to the final page. The ink shimmered in the light. Words began appearing across the page, Sarah's handwriting, guiding him step by step. A final seal, not of salt or metal, but truth. Jack recited the words, not in Latin, not in magic, just names. All the names of those who died guarding a lie. Jonah Bellamy, Reeves, Wilkes, Sarah Cooper, and then his own. Jack. As the last word left his mouth, the triangle beneath his feet flared. A rumble shook the chamber. Then silence. The kind of silence that feels final. Jack fell to his knees, exhausted. Maggie pulled him up. They made their way out as the cave began to collapse behind them, not violently, but slowly, like a story folding shut. Scout led the way, tail high. They stepped into morning. The sky was no longer gold. It was just sky, blue and cold and painfully normal. Jack looked back one last time. The rock of Devil's Tooth had cracked straight down the middle, and the light was finally gone. 1 month later, the land had gone quiet. No golden light bleeding from the trees. No whispers. No shadows watching from the tree line. Just wind in the pines and the low creak of branches in the cold. Devil's Tooth no longer loomed. What remained of the rock had split and crumbled into jagged pieces, half buried in frost and moss. Nature had started reclaiming it like it never should have been unearthed to begin with. Jack stood at the edge of the clearing, Scout at his heel. Maggie was a few steps behind, arms crossed, her breath visible in the December air. This is the last time I'll come here, Jack said quietly. It's not mine anymore. Maggie didn't answer. Just watched him as he crouched down and placed a small wooden box on the ground. Inside were Sarah's dog tags, the journal, and a folded piece of paper he'd written, but never sent words she'd never read, maybe never needed to, but ones he had to put down anyway. I forgive you, and I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. He'd sealed it with the old wax from her candle box, the one she'd used during blackouts. He remembered how the scent of lavender used to fill the house when she lit it, even during the worst storms. Jack Rose pressed a hand against the box, then stepped back. Scout whimpered, laying his head on his paws. Maggie finally moved forward and handed Jack a small pouch. He opened it. Salt and soil from the 3 sealed points. Ritual or not, she said some things deserve to be returned to the earth. Jack poured it gently over the box, then began covering it with dirt, bare hands, steady and sure. When he was done, he stood wiping the dust on his jeans. Do you believe it's over? Maggie asked. Jack looked around at the clearing, just trees and sky, and the hush of winter. I don't think it ever ends, he said. I think it just goes quiet for a while, until someone listens too closely. She gave a soft, knowing smile. And you done listening? He nodded. Yeah, I've heard enough. They walked back to the truck in silence, Scout following one paw at a time. Back at Jack's cabin, his real one miles from Devil's Tooth, the fire was already burning when they got in. Scout curled up near the hearth, finally sleeping without twitching at shadows. Jack poured 2 mugs of coffee and handed one to Maggie. They sat across from each other, the air thick with the kind of peace that only comes after surviving something too big to explain. You know, Maggie said, staring into her cup, my grandfather used to say, secrets were like seeds. They don't stay buried. They grow under the soil, take root, and eventually they break through. Jack took a sip. Guess we were the unlucky ones who had to pull up the weeds. She smirked. Lucky maybe. Alive, definitely. A beat passed. Then Jack asked, What'll you do now? Maggie exhaled, thinking. Maybe go back to teaching. Something normal. Maybe history this kind minus the demons. Jack raised an eyebrow. There's a this kind that doesn't include demons. She chuckled. Fair. She set her cup down. You could write it, you know. Jack frowned. Write what the story, she said. The truth. Not the myth. Not the gold. Just what it did to people. What it cost. What was almost lost. Jack looked at the fireplace. The flames danced in the glass. I think I'd rather let it rest. Maggie nodded, respectful. That's fair. But Jack thought about it long after she'd gone. That night he sat by the fire, pen in hand, blank paper in front of him. Not to write a book, just a memory. He didn't start with the cave or the map or the ghosts. He started with Sarah, her laugh, her stubbornness, the way she hummed to herself while fixing something broken. Because the story wasn't about gold or curses. It was about choices. About the things we inherit even when we don't ask for them. About how love, when it's real, doesn't always come wrapped in clean endings. Sometimes it asks you to break the rules. Sometimes it asks you to forgive something unforgivable. Sometimes it asks you to walk into the dark without a promise that you'll come back. Jack wrote until dawn, the fire burning low. And when the sun finally broke across the frost-covered hills, he folded the paper, placed it in a drawer, and made breakfast for Scout. No fanfare. No epilogue. Just life. Somewhere deep in the woods, far from any road or town, a tree had begun to grow over the place where Jack buried the box. It was small, thin, but steady, and in spring it would bloom,